HOA Karen tried to block me from moving out, the truth about my son. Shocked everyone. I thought leaving this neighborhood would be the end of the nightmare. But the nightmare was only beginning, because Karen wasn't going to let me go without her permission. She stood in my driveway like she owned my life, and when the flashing blue lights hit my street, I realized this fight wasn't about rules anymore. It was about power. And when my son stepped forward, the truth he carried with him was something Karen never saw coming. Welcome back to HOA Unit, where every story from suburbia hides secrets darker than the fences we build. My name is Mark. I live in a quiet cul-de-sac that never feels quiet. By day, I fix broken air conditioners. By night, I survive an HOA that never sleeps. And this is the story of the day I tried to move out. But Karen, the self-appointed queen of our neighborhood, decided to make it her war. I thought moving out would mean freedom. But freedom isn't something Karen gives away easily. She stood there, clipboard in one hand, eyes locked on my boxes stacked near the curb. The way she looked at me, it was like I had just committed a crime in broad daylight. And in her mind, I kept telling myself, ignore her, keep packing. But ignoring Karen was like ignoring thunder before a storm. The air changes, the silence tightens around you, and before you know it, lightning strikes. That morning, I had woken up early, the kind of early where the world is still gray and quiet. Birds weren't even singing yet. I wanted to load the truck before she noticed. But of course, Karen always noticed. She had a way of appearing out of nowhere, like she could smell rule breaking on the breeze, and sure enough, when I carried the first box out, there she was, standing on her porch in her pink robe, coffee mug in her hand, steam rising like smoke before a full moving day, she said. Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were sharp. I forced a smile. Yep, just loading up. Finally heading out. Her lips pressed together, like she'd bitten into something sour. You didn't file the departure form, she said. I laughed. Thought she was joking. But she wasn't joking. Karen never joked. There's no form for leaving, I said. Setting the box down on the truck bed, she stepped off her porch, walked slowly toward me, like a judge approaching the guilty. There's a process, she whispered. Her words stretched out like a warning. You can't just leave without HOA approval. It disrupts the harmony of the neighborhood. Harmony. That's what she called it. The same harmony that fined a man $100 because his lawn gnome leaned sideways. The same harmony that banned kids from chalk drawings on the sidewalk. I shook my head. I'm leaving today. Karen, with or without your form. That was the spark. Her face went pale, but her eyes burned. You'll regret this, she snapped, and with that, she turned on her heel and stormed back into her house. I thought maybe that was it. Maybe she'd slam a few doors, maybe write me one of her famous angry notes. I could live with that. But when the sun climbed higher, and the street started waking up, I saw her again. This time she wasn't alone. She was standing by the curb with her phone pressed to her ear, her voice loud enough for me to hear across the yard. Yes, officer. He's breaking HOA law right now. Yes, I need someone here immediately. My stomach dropped. She wasn't writing a note. She was calling the cops. I froze for a second. What would the neighbors think? What would my landlord say if police showed up? And most of all, why did she care so much if I left? It wasn't about me moving. It was about control. Karen didn't want to lose one more inch of it. The boxes felt heavier with each trip. I kept loading anyway, trying to act normal. But my hands were shaking. Every slam of the truck door echoed like a countdown clock. Soon the sirens would come, and then it happened. The low hum of a patrol car engine, the sharp reflection of blue and red lights bouncing off mailboxes. My heart raced. My son walked out of the house just then. He was carrying a duffel bag. calm as ever. "Dad, you okay?" he asked. I nodded, even though I wasn't. The cruiser stopped in front of the house. The officer stepped out. Karen rushed forward like she had been waiting her whole life for this. "There. That's him. He's breaking rules, leaving without permission, disturbing the neighborhood order." She sounded like she was reporting a dangerous criminal. The officer looked at her, then at me, then at the moving truck. Confusion flickered across his face. "Sir, can I see your ID?" he asked. I opened my mouth to answer, but before I could, my son stepped closer. His hand reached into his jacket. Karen crossed her arms, smirking. She thought she had won. She thought this was her victory, but what came out of his jacket wasn't a wallet. It wasn't cash. It wasn't papers. It was a badge. The sunlight hit it just right, and for the first time since I'd known Karen, she froze. Her eyes widened. Her lips parted. The clipboard in her hands trembled. I stayed quiet, because there was nothing to say. This was no longer my fight. This was my son's moment, and Karen had no idea what storm she had just invited onto her perfect little street. Neighbors started gathering near windows. Curtains twitched. You could feel the tension spreading like fire through dry grass. Everyone was waiting, watching, wondering what would happen next, and me. I just stood there, finally calm. Because for once, Karen wasn't the one in control. Karen didn't blink for a long time. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from water. She had power in her clipboard, in her fines, in her threats. And she had never been powerless until now. I watched her, and I remembered something. The truth about our neighborhood. It wasn't peaceful. It wasn't friendly. It was a prison with manicured lawns and color-coded houses. And Karen was the warden. When I first moved in, I thought it was perfect. Wide driveways, trimmed hedges, neighbors waving like they meant it. But the mask slipped fast. One day I planted flowers by my mailbox. Just yellow marigolds. The next morning I found a letter taped to my door. Flowers not in compliance with HOA color scheme. Signed, HOA President. That was my welcome gift. It only grew worse from there, every week. Another note. My trash can was 6 inches too close to the curb. My holiday lights were 1 shade too bright. My son's car had parked 2 inches over the line on the street. Each note felt like a scar, reminding me this place didn't belong to me, it belonged to her. Karen loved her little kingdom. She wore pearls to every HOA meeting. She tapped her pen against the table like a judge in court. And every neighbor sat in silence because silence was safer than speaking up. I once saw her fine an old man named Mr. Jenkins because his grass looked tired, not overgrown, not dead, just tired. How does grass look tired? Ask Karen. She'll find a way to prove it. It was control wrapped in the illusion of order, and for years I lived with it because I thought, maybe it's not worth the fight. Maybe it's easier to just play along. But something inside me always burned, and the day I decided to move out, that fire finally roared. Now, with the police standing in my driveway, Karen's power was cracking. She tried to steady her voice. "Officer, you can't just ignore this. He's violating HOA Code Section 14-" The officer cut her off with a sigh. "Ma'am, this is a moving truck, not a crime scene." The neighbors chuckled softly from behind. Curtains, but Karen's face only hardened. Then my son spoke. His voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that makes everyone listen. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back." Karen actually laughed, a shaky, nervous laugh. "Step back? This is my neighborhood. I'm in charge here." She pointed her pen like it was a weapon, but my son's badge gleamed again in the sunlight, and her laugh died in her throat for years. She had written rules that made grown men feel small. She had embarrassed mothers at meetings for letting their kids draw chalk hearts on the sidewalk. She had reduced strong neighbors into timid followers. But now, standing in front of my son, she looked like the one on trial. The officer shifted uncomfortably. It wasn't every day an FBI badge showed up on a suburban street, and the crowd behind curtains grew thicker. Phones started recording. Karen hated cameras. Because cameras showed the cracks she couldn't hide. I leaned against the moving truck for the first time. I felt no fear, no weight from her rules, just the sweet taste of justice finally hanging in the air. My mind flashed through years of absurd rules, the mailbox paint inspection, where she forced everyone to repaint in the same shade of beige, the holiday ban where she fined a family for leaving their inflatable snowman up one day too long, the basketball hoop crackdown, where she said hoops were an eyesore that destroyed community values. Every single ridiculous moment added up to this one, her clipboard, her crown, her power, slipping from her grip with every second. But Karen wasn't done, her voice cracked. But she pushed forward. "You can't stop me. I'll call the HOA board right now. I'll have them all here." She fumbled with her phone, her hands trembling as if the device weighed 1,000 pounds. Nobody moved to help her. Nobody came running in her defense, because deep down, the neighbors wanted to see her fall. My son's eyes narrowed. "Karen, this isn't about HOA rules anymore," he said softly. His words hung in the air. Even the birds seemed to pause. She stared at him, confused. "What do you mean?" she whispered. But he didn't answer yet. He let the silence speak for him, and in that silence, you could feel the walls of her little empire start to crumble. I looked around at the houses, perfect lawns, trimmed hedges, all hiding families who lived in quiet fear of her, and I realized something. It was never about rules. It was always about control. And now, control was slipping through her fingers. The officer finally spoke again. "Sir, you're free to continue moving. There's no law being broken here." Karen gasped, her face twisted, as if the world itself had betrayed her. "You can't just let him go," she cried. But the officer turned away, and in that moment, she looked smaller than I had ever seen her. I picked up another box, heavier than it looked. But my arms felt light, because for once, the weight wasn't mine to carry. It was hers, and everyone knew it. The neighborhood that once bowed to her power was now watching her unravel, her own rules, her own fear, swallowing her whole. I glanced at my son. His calm eyes met mine, and I knew this was just the beginning, because the truth he carried with him was something even bigger than Karen's clipboard, something that could shake this entire street to its core. And now I need to ask you. Karen didn't disappear after that moment. If anything, she came back stronger, like a storm that looks like it's moving away, but then turns back with twice the rage. The badge had stunned her, silenced her, embarrassed her. But Karen wasn't someone who stayed quiet for long. The next morning I thought maybe it was over. The officer had left. The neighbors had gone back to their coffee cups and curtain peeking, and Karen had slammed her door hard enough to rattle the mailboxes. But when I stepped outside with another box, there she was again. This time she wasn't in her pink robe. She was dressed like she was going to battle, hair pinned tight, pearls gleaming, clipboard tucked under her arm like a sword. Her smile was sharp, too sharp. "Good morning," she said, like nothing had happened yesterday, but her eyes burned with unfinished business. I didn't answer. I just lifted the box and walked toward the truck. She followed. Her heels clicked on the pavement, every step echoing like a countdown. "You think this is over," she hissed. "You embarrassed me in front of the whole neighborhood." I set the box down, turned to face her. "You did that to yourself, Karen." Her jaw tightened. Her grip on the clipboard turned white. "No, you did it." She flipped a page on the clipboard. Her pen pointed to a paragraph of tiny words. According to HOA bylaws, any moving activity must be approved 2 weeks in advance, she read. Her voice was shaking with rage. But she tried to sound official. I almost laughed. Almost. Karen, there's no such bylaw. She smirked. There is now. My chest tightened. She had rewritten the rules overnight. Literally overnight. Was that even legal? But legality never stopped Karen before. She wasn't about justice. She was about control. Karen, you can't just invent laws because you're angry, I said. But she leaned in close, her perfume heavy, her whisper sharp. I can, and I did. My son walked outside again. He was calmer than me, steadier. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just looked at her clipboard, then back at her, and said one sentence that froze her in place. Karen, forging bylaws is a federal crime. Her face drained of color, but only for a second. Then she laughed, that high, fake laugh that tried to sound confident. You think I'm scared of you? She sneered. She held up the clipboard like a shield. You don't belong here. You never did. Neighbors started stepping out again. They pretended to check their mail, water their plants. But really, they wanted a front row seat. And Karen loved an audience, even if this time, the audience, which wasn't cheering for her. Go ahead, she said. Call whoever you want. But I'm not letting you move until the board approves it. Her voice grew louder. Do you hear me? This is my neighborhood. My son's jaw tightened. I could see him fighting to stay calm, because when you carry the kind of badge he carried, you learn control. But even he was reaching his limit. And me? I was stuck between anger and laughter, the absurdity of it all. The fact that this woman actually believed she could stop me from leaving my own house? It would have been funny if it wasn't so terrifying. Then she did something I'll never forget. She pulled out her phone again, dialed with shaking fingers, and when she spoke, her words chilled me. This is Karen, HOA president. I need backup. Backup. Not the cops this time. Not the officer who had dismissed her. She meant the board, the others who sat in silence at every meeting, the ones who let her run this place like a queen, and within minutes, they came. Cars rolled into the cul-de-sac. 3, then 4, then 5. Doors slammed. Men in polo shirts. Women with matching binders. The HOA board. Her loyal army. They lined up behind her like soldiers. Clipboards. Pens. Fake smiles hiding real fear. Karen raised her chin. You see? You're not just fighting me, she said. You're fighting all of us. The board nodded, too scared not to. And suddenly the whole street felt smaller, like the walls were closing in. It wasn't one woman against me anymore. It was the entire system she had built. My son stepped closer to me, his voice low. They're bluffing, he whispered. But I wasn't so sure, because power wasn't in their words. It was in the fear they spread. And fear had ruled this street for years. Karen's voice rang out again. Neighbors! Witness this, she shouted. This man is defying our laws, disrespecting our order. Do we allow this? Her words floated across the cul-de-sac. Some neighbors peeked out, but stayed quiet. Others lowered their heads, afraid to be seen choosing sides. The silence spoke louder than any answer. I felt heat rise in my chest. Enough was enough. I stepped forward, stood face to face with her. You don't own me, Karen, I said. You don't own this street or these people, no matter how many rules you write. Her smirk cracked. For just a second, her eyes darted around, searching for support. But nobody spoke. Even her so-called board shuffled nervously, because deep down, they knew I was right. The air hung heavy, the battle lines drawn in the cracks of the pavement. Me and my son, against Karen and her army. But I didn't feel afraid anymore. I felt ready, because this wasn't just about leaving. It was about ending something bigger, something that had poisoned this street for years. And for the first time, I could see the fear wasn't mine anymore. It was hers. The boards stood behind Karen like shadows, their clipboards tight in their hands, their faces pale but obedient. It was almost funny. A group of adults dressed like they were heading to a barbecue, now standing in formation like soldiers ready for war. But there was no laughter in the air, only tension. Karen raised her chin. "This is not a joke," she announced. Her voice echoed through the cul-de-sac. "This man thinks he can move without permission, without process, without respect for the order we have built." The neighbors leaned closer to their curtains, phones tilted at the perfect angle to record. She wanted a show, and she was giving them one. I looked at the board members one by one. Mr. Daniels, who once begged Karen not to fine him for his dog barking; Mrs. Taylor, who cried at a meeting when Karen called her careless for letting her grandkids draw chalk flowers on her sidewalk; and George, the treasurer who never spoke unless Karen gave him permission. They weren't here because they believed in her. They were here because they were afraid of her. But fear only works when everyone agrees to play along. And I was done playing. My son Sas stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even look angry. His calm was louder than Karen shouting. "Ma'am, you're overstepping your authority," he said. "This man has every right to move out of his home. You can't stop him." Karen's eyes darted to the badge again. Her lip trembled, but she straightened. "I don't care what badge you carry," she snapped. "This is an HOA matter, not federal." Her voice cracked on the last word, but she forced herself to keep going. "And if he defies us, there will be consequences." Consequences? The word rolled off her tongue like poison. For years she had used it to keep this street in line. Late fees, liens, threats of lawsuits. She wielded consequences like a weapon, and everyone bowed. But now, I wasn't bowing. Not anymore. I laughed softly. It wasn't forced. It wasn't nervous. It was the kind of laugh that comes when fear finally breaks apart. "Consequences?" I said. "Karen, the only consequence here is you losing your little kingdom." The neighbors stirred. Some gasped. Others smirked behind their curtains. It was the first time someone had said it out loud. The first time someone had dared to pull the mask off. Karen's face turned red. "You think you're brave?" she shouted. "You think you can defy the board?" She turned to her army. "Show him what happens when people don't follow the rules." The board hesitated. Their eyes darted to each other. Mr. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. Mrs. Taylor looked down at her shoes. George swallowed hard and clutched his clipboard tighter. They weren't soldiers. They were prisoners just like the rest of us. "Karen," Mr. Daniels finally muttered, "maybe we should just let him move." Karen spun on him so fast it made the crowd gasp. "Let him move? Do you realize what that means? If he leaves without permission, anyone could leave. Anyone could break rules. Chaos will spread." Her words spilled out like a sermon, but nobody was nodding this time. Her voice grew louder, her arms flailed, the pearls around her neck rattled with every word. She looked less like a leader, and more like someone losing control of their own mind. The officer from the day before hadn't returned, but I could almost hear his voice in my head. "This is a moving truck, not a crime scene." And now, the entire street was seeing it too. My son stepped closer to me. "Dad, just keep loading," he whispered. So I did. I lifted another box. The sound of cardboard scraping against the truck bed echoed louder than Karen's shouting, and with every box I loaded, her power seemed to shrink. The boards started shifting back, one by one, until Karen stood alone at the front, her army dissolving behind her. But she wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. Her voice broke into a scream. "If you move one more box, I'll sue you. I'll take you to HOA court. You'll never sell this house again." Her threats rained down like hailstones, but they bounced harmlessly off the walls of silence around her, because the truth was out, the truth every neighbor could finally see. She didn't have power, she only had fear, and fear had just cracked. My son raised his voice, steady and sharp. "Ma'am, do you realize what you're doing? You're harassing a resident in front of witnesses. You're abusing authority you don't even legally have. That's not just wrong, that's criminal." Her face twisted, her hands shook, but still she clung to her clipboard like it was the last piece of her crown, and I realized Karen wasn't just fighting me, she was fighting the end of her reign. The air grew heavy again. The neighbors leaned closer to their windows, phones recording every second. Karen's empire wasn't falling in secret, it was falling in public, and the humiliation was burning her alive. I set another box in the truck, turned back to her, and for the first time, I didn't see a queen. I saw a desperate woman, clinging to rules that no longer mattered, and deep down, I knew this wasn't just about moving anymore. This was about exposing her, about pulling down the curtain she had hidden behind for years, and my son was ready to do just that. Karen's screams still echoed in the air, but something had shifted. Her board had melted away. Her neighbors were no longer afraid, and my son stood at my side like a wall of calm against her storm. The sun was high now, its light cut across the cul-de-sac, and every glare seemed to spotlight Karen's unraveling. Her pearls glistened like they were strangling her. Her clipboard shook in her hands. Her words were losing their weight. She spat out another threat. "You'll regret this. I'll make sure you never live peacefully again." Her voice cracked in the middle of peacefully, and that crack spread like a fracture in glass. Everyone heard it, everyone felt it. I was done arguing, done playing her game, but my son, he wasn't done. Not yet. He stepped forward, slow, deliberate. Every neighbor's eyes followed him. Karen froze, backing up half a step, like even her heels were afraid to stand too close to him. "Ma'am," he said quietly, but his voice carried across the street, calm, steady, commanding. "Do you understand the weight of what you're doing right now?" Karen's eyes darted. She forced a laugh. "What weight? You're just a boy. You don't know how things work here." But her voice shook. The laugh cracked before it even finished, and then it happened. He reached into his jacket again. Every neighbor leaned closer to their curtains. Phones lifted higher. Karen's breath hitched. This time, he didn't just flash it. He held it up. The gold badge glimmered in the sunlight. The letters clear, Federal Bureau of Investigation. The silence that fell over the street was thick enough to choke on. Even the birds seemed to pause mid-flight. Karen's face went pale. Her clipboard clattered to the pavement. It was the first time I had ever seen her drop it. You can't," she stammered. Her words tripped over themselves. "You can't bring that here. This isn't federal business." But her voice was shrinking. And my son wasn't shrinking with her. "He was rising, Karen," he said. "And now—" He didn't whisper. He didn't soften. His voice cut sharp as steel. "You've crossed a line." The neighbors gasped. Some even opened their doors now. The crowd wasn't hiding anymore. They wanted to see this. They wanted to witness the queen stripped of her crown. Karen backed up another step. Her heels wobbled against the curb. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, but still she tried, still she clung to the only weapon she had left. "You're bluffing," she snapped, her voice weak but desperate. "You think you can scare me with a badge? I'll report you. I'll call someone higher. My son raised his hand, and she stopped mid-sentence. "Karen," he said, "you've been harassing residents for years, abusing authority you don't actually have, and now you've involved law enforcement under false pretenses." Her eyes darted wildly. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. He took a step closer. "And if you keep going, I can open a file." The word file hit her like a slap. Her face drained of blood, her knees seemed to wobble, because Karen wasn't just afraid of losing control, she was afraid of being exposed, of every petty rule, every forged bylaw, every threat written in shaky pen, finally being put under a microscope. The neighbors murmured, some smiled, some even clapped softly from their porches. The empire was crumbling, and Karen knew it. She bent down quickly, grabbed her clipboard from the pavement. Her hand shook as she hugged it to her chest, like a shield that had already been shattered. Her pearls rattled against each other. Her eyes darted from me to my son, to the neighbors now stepping out into the sunlight. You can't do this," she whispered. But the whisper carried no power. Not anymore. I felt something strange in that moment. Not anger, not fear, relief. The kind of relief you feel when a storm finally breaks, when the air shifts, when the pressure lifts. Because for the first time, Karen wasn't untouchable, she wasn't unstoppable. She was just a woman, and everyone could see it. My son lowered his hand, but his voice stayed firm. "This ends now," he said. "You don't control him. You don't control this street, and if you try this again, you'll answer for it in ways you can't imagine." Karen stumbled back. She opened her mouth again, but no sound came. Her power was gone, her kingdom was collapsing, and she couldn't hold it together anymore. The board members who had stood behind her were gone. The neighbors she once ruled were watching her like spectators at a fallen play. And me. I picked up another box, heavier than the rest, and placed it gently in the truck. Every slam of cardboard felt like another nail in her coffin. Karen finally turned. Her heels clicked unevenly as she stormed back toward her house. Her shoulders hunched, her head bowed, and for the first time, the queen of the cul-de-sac looked defeated. The street was quiet again, but it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't fear, it was freedom. I looked at my son. His calm eyes met mine, and I realized the truth about him didn't just shock Karen. It saved me. It saved us all. Karen's footsteps echoed as she stormed back toward her house. But the echo didn't sound powerful anymore. It sounded hollow, fragile, like glass ready to shatter. Her shoulders weren't straight. Her head wasn't high for the first time. She looked small, but the street wasn't ready to let her slip away quietly. The silence that followed was heavy, too heavy. And then, one by one, doors began to open. Mr. Jenkins shuffled out with his cane, the man she fined because his grass looked tired. Mrs. Taylor followed, clutching her granddaughter's hand. The same little girl Karen once scolded for all carts on the sidewalk. Even George, the treasurer who had always hidden in her shadow, stepped off his porch. The neighborhood wasn't hiding anymore. Karen stopped halfway up her walkway. She froze when she heard the sound of footsteps behind her, dozens of them. The people she once ruled, the people she once silenced. Now, gathering like a jury, she turned slowly, her face pale. Her pearls rattled around her neck as if they too were trembling. And when she spoke, her voice cracked. "What are you all looking at?" Nobody answered right away. The silence itself was a verdict. Then Mr. Jenkins raised his cane, not to strike her, but to point. "You've gone too far, Karen," he said. His voice was weak, but steady, and it cut through the air like thunder. Karen's mouth fell open. Her eyes darted around wildly. She was looking for someone to defend her, but there was no one left. Mrs. Taylor spoke next. Her voice shook with emotion. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone when I just wanted to let my grandkids play. You humiliated me for nothing." Her granddaughter squeezed her hand tighter. Karen opened her mouth to argue, but no sound came. Then George, loyal George, the treasurer who never spoke, he finally did. His voice was deep, trembling, but strong enough to carry. "I'm done covering for you, Karen. I'm done signing papers I know are wrong." That was the moment the dam broke. Voices spilled out, one after another, accusations, stories, pain they had all bottled up for years. You fined me because my wreath was the wrong shade of red. You told me my son's skateboard was destroying property values. You tried to ban us from putting pumpkins out because they were clutter. Each word hit her like a stone, and for the first time, Karen had no stones to throw back. Her face crumbled, her hands shook. The clipboard slipped again, this time landing face down in the grass. I stood by the moving truck, watching it all. It felt unreal. For years she had been untouchable, and now her own kingdom was turning against her. It wasn't just my fight anymore. It was everyone's. My son stayed at my side. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just watched with those calm eyes because he knew this wasn't about revenge. It was about truth finally breaking free. Karen raised her hands weakly. Stop. Stop this. She pleaded. Her voice sounded small, like a child caught in a lie, but the crowd didn't stop. The flood had started, and there was no stopping it now. You made us afraid in our own homes. You made this place miserable. You don't get to decide how we live. Her knees buckled. She grabbed the railing of her porch to steady herself. The queen of the cul-de-sac. Reduced to a shaking figure clutching wood for balance, her pearls rattled once more, and then snapped. Beads scattered across the pavement, rolling into the cracks of the street she once claimed to control. Gasps filled the air. It was symbolic, the final break in her crown, and Karen knew it. She sank onto the porch step, her face buried in her hands. For years, she had stood above everyone. Now she sat below them, drowning in their voices. The board members she had once commanded stood frozen. But they didn't move to help her. They didn't defend her, because they were free now too. I lifted the last box into the truck. The sound was louder than her sobs, and when I turned back, I saw her eyes through the gaps in her fingers. She wasn't angry anymore. She was terrified, because power had left her, and it wasn't coming back. The neighbors slowly quieted. The voices faded into a heavy silence again, but it wasn't fear this time. It was relief, like chains being broken in unison. Karen finally lowered her hands, her face streaked with tears and rage. She looked at me, her voice barely more than a whisper. You think you've won. Her words trembled. You think this is over. I didn't answer. I didn't need to, because the street itself answered for me. The neighbors turned away from her. Their backs said everything her words couldn't undo, and in that moment, Karen wasn't just dethroned. She was abandoned. The queen had no kingdom left. I climbed into the truck. My son sat beside me. The engine roared to life, and as the tires rolled over the scattered pearls in the street, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, freedom. But as I looked into the mirror, I saw her still sitting there, alone on the porch, her face hidden, her world shattered, and I couldn't help but wonder. The sound of the truck engine rumbled through the cul-de-sac, but it wasn't the sound of leaving, it was the sound of release. Every vibration felt like a chain breaking. Every mile I would drive away from here would be one more mile of freedom. I glanced into the side mirror. Karen was still on her porch. Her hands clutched the railing, her pearls gone, her clipboard abandoned in the grass. The woman who once ruled this street like a queen now sat like a prisoner in her own kingdom. But the prison walls weren't ours anymore. They were hers. My son sat beside me. He didn't say a word at first, just looked ahead, calm, steady, like always. I knew he wasn't proud of showing his badge that way, but I also knew he did it because he had to, because someone had to stand between me and the storm as we rolled forward. The neighbors stepped out farther into the street. Some waved, some clapped softly, a few even shouted, "Good luck." But their faces all carried the same look, Relief, relief that the spell was broken, relief that maybe their own chains could fall too. I thought back to my first day in this neighborhood. The fresh paint smell, the perfect lawns, the fake smiles at the welcome barbecue. Back then I thought I had found peace. But peace under Karen was never real. It was a performance, and we were all the actors trapped in her play. Now the stage had collapsed, the curtains had fallen, and the audience had turned its back on the director. We reached the stop sign at the end of the street. The same sign Karen once forced us all to repaint because the city's paint wasn't uniform enough. I slowed the truck. The red octagon glared at me, but this time, it didn't feel like a command. It felt like a farewell. My son finally spoke. "You okay, Dad?" His voice was soft, but I could hear the weight behind it. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure, because leaving wasn't just about boxes and trucks. It was about everything she had taken from me. The nights I lost sleep over letters taped to my door. The money wasted on ridiculous fines. The constant feeling of being watched, judged, controlled. That wasn't just gone in one drive. It would take time to heal. But as I looked at my son, I felt something stronger than bitterness, pride, because the truth about him, the truth Karen never saw coming, had saved me, had saved us all. And maybe, just maybe, it had saved this neighborhood too, behind us. The street was alive with whispers. The neighbors were already gathering, talking about bylaws, talking about votes, talking about freedom. Karen sat alone, her empire crumbling brick by brick, and I knew nothing would ever be the same again. The wheels rolled over the asphalt. The houses grew smaller in the mirror. Each driveway, each fence, each mailbox was a reminder of battles fought and lost. But as they faded into the distance, so did the weight on my shoulders. The road ahead wasn't perfect. Life outside the HOA wasn't going to be easy. But it was going to be mine, and that was enough. Still, I couldn't shake one thought. Karen wasn't gone. Not yet. Her crown was broken, but her hunger for control wouldn't vanish overnight. Would she come back? Would she fight to reclaim her throne? Or would she drown in the silence she had once forced on others? Only time would tell. I pressed the gas a little harder. The truck picked up speed. The open road stretched before me like a promise. And for the first time in years, I smiled, because I had won. Not just against Karen, but against fear itself as the last houses disappeared in the mirror. I whispered to myself, "Goodbye, Karen." Not in anger, not in hate, but in closure. She had tried to block me from moving out. She had tried to chain me with rules and threats. But the truth about my son had broken those chains, and now I was free. The wind slipped through the cracked window. The world smelled different, not of cut grass and fresh paint, but of air that belonged to no one. And that was the sweetest smell of all. I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes for just a second, and I thought, maybe this was what peace really felt like.